As wrestling fans, we've seen plenty of bad wrestlers and plenty of great matches, but sometimes those two things collide. Here are 10 amazing matches that somehow featured awful wrestlers. At number 10, it's Shawn Michaels vs Sycho Sid. Sid wasn't exactly a polished wrestler. His offense was basic and his ring psychology wasn't one of his strengths, but none of that mattered because he had charisma and the fans loved him. He felt like a megastar the moment he walked through the curtain, and this match at the Survivor Series was probably his best ever. It was a WWF title match in Madison Square Garden, and the crowd was electric. They were fully behind the big man from the very start, and the reason this match worked so well was HBK. He bumped around like Sid was an unstoppable monster, and he made every move look devastating. Shawn was always great at selling David versus Goliath matches, and this was one of his best. Sid often looked like $1 million before the bell rang, and here he finally looked like $1 million after it rang too, mostly thanks to HBK. At number 9, it's Randy Savage versus The Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior was a megastar, but not for his wrestling skills. Yes, he had the look and the energy, but in the ring, it tended to fall apart pretty quickly in anything but squash matches. And yet, this match was incredible, arguably Warrior's best match ever, or at least neck and neck with his match against Hogan. And that's not because Warrior had magically improved as a wrestler, it's because of how this match was constructed. It was paced perfectly, and I'm sure you figured out who was responsible for that. The Macho Man laid every beat out beforehand and built the story of the match around Warrior's limited offense, and he sold for the Warrior like his life depended on it. After the match, Miss Elizabeth ran in from the crowd to save Savage from a beatdown by Sherry. In one of the most memorable and emotional moments in wrestling history, the Macho King was reunited with his princess. It was the perfect end to an excellent match. At number 8 on our list, it's John Cena versus the Great Khali. The Great Khali was physically imposing, but that was about it. He was slow and clumsy, and he had no sense of timing, and even for a big man, his offense was very limited indeed. In 2007, Cena was on his unstoppable babyface run, and he needed a monster to slay. Their first match at Judgment Day was awful, so fans couldn't believe there was going to be a rematch. Expectations were at rock bottom, but somehow this Falls Count Anywhere match really worked. Cena dragged Khali through a wild brawl that covered all of his weaknesses. They fought through the crowd and kept the pace moving, and the finish looked really impressive. In 2007, people were saying that Cena couldn't wrestle, but bad wrestlers don't carry the Great Khali to a good match, and that's exactly what he did here. At number 7 in our countdown, it's the British Bulldog versus the Warlord. The Warlord looked like a monster, but that's about all he had going for him. He had no charisma, no idea how to work a crowd, and his in-ring skills were almost non-existent. It's no stretch to call him one of the worst wrestlers of all time. The story behind this match was simple. Warlord had an unbeatable full Nelson, and Davey Boy was going to try and break it. Even by the standards of 1991, this looked like a bad matchup, but it turned into a tight and tense fight built around whether Davey could break that full Nelson. The crowd was into it, and the clean power slam finish landed perfectly. It was easily the best singles match of Warlord's career, which isn't saying much, but still. And Bulldog was at his peak during this period. He was so confident and in control, and he made this thing work perfectly. At number 6, it's Kurt Angle versus Shane McMahon. Shane wasn't a trained wrestler. He was all guts and no technique, and nobody expected much from this 2001 King of the Ring match, but it became one of the Attitude Era's most unforgettable moments. This thing could have easily turned into a complete disaster, but Kurt held it together, and Shane earned a different kind of respect that night. He won a place in the fans' hearts thanks to his willingness to endure a huge amount of punishment for their entertainment. In at number 5, it's DDP versus Goldberg. Goldberg's matches were always best when they were kept short. His limitations became obvious when his matches went longer than a couple of minutes, but this match at Halloween Havoc 1998 was the exception to that rule. Goldberg went into this as WCW champion, and despite all expectations, he and DDP delivered an absolute banger. The match was surprisingly technical. It was full of reversals and counters and a slow build-up that made every move feel important. The crowd was red hot, and this ended up being a genuinely great pay-per-view main event. DDP made Goldberg look incredible and carried him to arguably the best match of his entire career. Roman Reigns vs Big Show is number 4 on our list. In 2015, WWE had picked Roman Reigns as their next top guy, but the fans did not agree with that selection. In fact, they absolutely hated him, and on paper, this last man standing match at Extreme Rules looked like it was going to be torture to sit through. But somehow, these two men delivered a really good match. It was stiff and dramatic, and full of big moments. The Chicago crowd got pulled into the action and reacted to every move. What looked like a guaranteed slog turned out to be the highlight of the entire night. At number 3, it's AJ Styles vs Jinder Mahal. Jinder's 2017 main event push remains one of WWE's most baffling ever decisions. He was best known for being in the utterly cringeworthy 3-man band, and then suddenly he was WWE champion. For 6 months he dragged the title through matches that nobody wanted to see, and this was supposed to be a routine title defense until WWE made a last-minute call to end Jinder's reign and crown AJ as champion instead. And to everyone's surprise, this was a really good match, probably the best match of Jinder's career. And we also came out of it with a champion who actually deserved to hold the title. At number 2 on our list, it's Beulah McGillicutty versus Bill Alfonso. Alfonso wasn't a wrestler, he was just an annoying referee and manager, and Beulah wasn't a wrestler either, she was just Tommy Dreamer's valet. So when ECW booked them in an actual match, expectations were low to say the least. But the real reason for this match taking place was a punishment to Alfonso, who'd allegedly gone behind Paul Heyman's back and was helping wrestlers jump to WCW. This was meant to humiliate him, but it became one of ECW's most talked about matches. It was total chaos. Fonzie bled like a tap, and Beulah held nothing back either. This wasn't a wrestling match in the traditional sense, it was probably closer to a car crash, and Fonzie more than made up for his previous loyalty issues. And at number 1 in our countdown of amazing matches featuring awful wrestlers, it's Bret Hart versus Tom McGee. Tom McGee looked like the total package. He had the muscles and the athleticism, but once the bell rang, it all fell apart. He was stiff and awkward and completely lacked ring awareness, but that didn't stop Vince McMahon from being convinced that he was the next Hulk Hogan. This was McGee's tryout match in 1986, and it was Bret's job to test him out in front of a crowd. After the match, Vince was convinced he'd found his next megastar, but this footage disappeared for decades, and when it finally resurfaced, the truth came out. What no one realised at the time was that every second of this match had been engineered by Bret. This is one of the greatest carry jobs in wrestling history, because Bret had laid the whole thing out beforehand to protect McGee from himself. Of course, Vince eventually realised that McGee was a disaster in the ring with anyone else, and he was never seen again. If you want more wrestling lists and documentaries, hit subscribe and then check out the playlist on the screen right now.